Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and we now turn to the last of our Thoreau readings. I'm with you on page 388, 389. Go ahead and be there now in your hymnals. And we're going to turn to look at Henry David Thoreau's classic essay, Civil Disobedience. Civil Disobedience. Now, of course, you see the word "from" at the top of page 388, which means that this is an essay much longer than what you're going to have here in your book. What is this essay about, and why is it so influential? You can say this in your notes right now, that this is one of the most influential essays in the history of American thought. Hands down. Really? How come? Well, to appreciate the essay, you got to appreciate a little story. I've already told you, Thoreau lived out in the woods. He had a shoe that needed repair. He walked into Concord, a little distance, so that he could get his shoe fixed. And while he was there, the police official of the town came up to him and said, Henry, I noticed that you didn't pay the poll tax. The tax that you have to pay the other day, and I need you to pay it. And Thoreau said, "Well, Sam, I haven't paid that tax ever." And the government official, the sheriff, looked at him and said, "Well, I need you to pay that, Henry. I know you live out there in the woods. You don't have much for currency, so if you need me to, I can float you a loan to help you pay your tax." And Henry David Thoreau says, No, you don't understand. I'm not paying the tax because I can't afford it. I'm paying the tax because I don't agree with it. And now the sheriff says, "Well, I don't know what to say about that, but I'm gonna have to arrest you if you don't pay this tax, and because I don't have another choice." And Thoreau looks at him and says, "You do have another choice." He says, "What choice do I have? The law is you have to pay taxes, and I'm the one that tells you have to pay those taxes." David Thoreau says, "Well, you could resign your position. You could just quit your job." A few years later, in an India courtroom, Mahatma Gandhi will stand in front of a British judge and say the exact same thing when a British judge challenges Gandhi in his movement to provide, first of all, free civil rights to South Africans, and then ultimately to millions and millions of Indians. Henry David Thoreau is put in jail. Now, he only spends one night there. And then no one is exactly sure who pays the tax, but he gets paid. Then Thoreau sits down and he writes a very famous essay, and he calls it Civil Disobedience. And he will outline his views on non-violent resistance. Non-violent resistance. If you are non-violent, then you are trying to find resolution to conflict without the use or the resorting to violence. But what is resistance? To fight back. Civil disobedience is Thoreau's political statement. You want to write that down. Civil disobedience is Thoreau's political statement. Now, what do we mean when we use the term politics? Of or relating to the rules of the group. Of or relating to the rules of the group. Okay? Why did Thoreau not want to pay his taxes? Read with me on page 388, the background information. The Mexican War, are you reading with me? Top of page 388. The Mexican War was a conflict between Mexico and the United States that took place from 1846 to 1848. The war was caused by a dispute over the boundary between Texas and Mexico, as well as by Mexico's refusal to discuss selling California and New Mexico to the United States. Believing that President Polk had intentionally provoked the conflict before gaining congressional approval, Thoreau and many Americans strongly objected to the war. In protest, Thoreau refused to pay his taxes and was forced to spend a night in jail. After the experience, he writes Civil Disobedience, urging, you want to write this down at level 1. This is what this essay is about. Urging people to resist governmental policies with which they disagree. This is such an important element of American political thought. Now, I have sometimes said that if you need a single line to explain American political thought, it is, "Don't tell me what to do." We see that a lot in American political thought. Don't tell me what to do. No single essay is more influential in that regard. If you are a part of the government, then you have the right and you have the voice to say, "Don't tell me what to do." No, I don't agree. In other words, I don't believe that what the government is doing is right. Therefore, I am going to protest in some way. Okay? Now, the two most influential thinkers of the 20th century who play this game will now mention. The first I've already mentioned, Gandhi. Gandhi, of course, uses non-violent resistance to provide freedom to the Indian people from British colonial power. The second, of course, is an American, Martin Luther King Jr. Think about what Martin Luther King Jr. does. By the way, this essay very influential to MLK. What does MLK do? Well, he says, we as African Americans are not being allowed to vote in the Deep South. We do not have civil rights. We are not being treated the same. For example, when we go to the Big Mac, we have to eat at a different Big Mac. We can't sit inside and eat at the normal counter. What to do? One thing you could do is just go get a 12 gauge and start shooting white people. That'd be one answer. But King said, it's not a useful answer, because in a famous essay, King said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." What an interesting line. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Right? You do nasty to me, I do nasty back to you. Of course, that means what? You got to do more nasty back to me, which means what? Now I got to do more nasty back to you, right? An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. What to do? King said, we're going to do non-violent resistance following the work of Thoreau, following the ideas of Henry David Thoreau, the great American writer. Well, what does that look like? Simple. We'll go in and we'll sit in the counter of the restaurant, and we'll just sit there. Called them sit-ins. We'll just sit there, and then we'll see what happens. Well, what happens, we know, is lots of nasty stuff, right? Lots of people treating those poor people who sat there very nasty. They spit on them, they hit them, they dump stuff on top of them. But photographs are being taken, and those photographs are published. And of course, very slowly, but over time, Americans' opinions started to change about what was happening in the Deep South. Henry David Thoreau's civil, that means nonviolent, disobedience, that means not obeying your government. Whoa, now this is an interesting idea. Authority tells you to do something and you say, no, I don't believe it's the right thing for me to do. No. How is Thoreau, as an American who is involved in an American government, how can he explain that? That's what this essay is about. Notice what he says to begin the essay. It's a radical position. There is a lot of debate today about what Thoreau meant. Read it with me. I'm on 388. I heartily accept the motto. In other words, I totally agree. That government is best, which governs least. Boy, some of you will write that line down. That is a very popular line even today. What is the best form of government? The government that leaves us alone. The government that stays out of our business and doesn't always tell us what to do. Right? Less government is better than more government. If you've ever heard that line, that is a Thoreau line. Okay? That's where this idea comes from. And I should like to see it acted upon. Are you reading with me some more? And I should like to see it acted upon to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe. Whoa, are you ready for this? That government is best, which governs not at all. Oh, now that sounds like the political form of what we would call anarchy. To live without any government, without any rules. Okay? But notice Thoreau will finish this line by saying, and when men are prepared for it, That will be the kind of government which they will have. What is government? He will argue in the next line, it is an expedient, a necessary evil. In other words, you have to have some laws, Thoreau says, but let's have the fewest laws possible so that people are free. So notice here we're going to shift a little bit from our understanding of Thoreau with individual freedom to talk about political freedom. In other words, he wants to live in an America where there is less repressive laws, right? And he wants to have the right, as a minority even, of one person to go against his government or to stand up and fight against his government, to speak against his government. But fight how? Not with 12 gauges. Notice it's civil disobedience. Non-violent, in other words, right? In other words, notice Thoreau didn't punch the sheriff in the face. He just said, arrest me and take me to jail. Okay, I'll just go to jail. That's his form of protest. Now, this, as I say, essay becomes one of the most centrally important ideas in 20th and 21st century politics. If you've noticed anything in the news in the last decade, you've seen lots and lots of different protests where people get upset and so they will march on Washington or they will sit outside of a building or something like that. Are you familiar with that concept? All of that comes from this essay. So let's take a look at it. You don't have much of this essay now, not a lot, but let's get a little bit of a flavor of what Henry David Thoreau has to say, politically speaking. Here we go. A few lines from Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau.
From Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which I also believe. That government is best which governs not at all, and when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weighty and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool. For in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. This American government, what is it but a tradition, though a recent one, endeavoring to transmit itself unimpaired to posterity, but each instant losing some of its integrity? It has not the vitality and force of a single living man, for a single man can bend it to his will. It is a sort of wooden gun to the people themselves, and if ever they should use it in earnest as a real one against each other, it will surely split. But it is not the less necessary for this, for the people must have some complicated machinery or other, and hear its din, to satisfy that idea of government which they have. Governments show, thus, how successfully men can be imposed on, even impose on themselves, for their own advantage. It is excellent, we must all allow. Yet this government never of itself furthered any enterprise, but by the alacrity with which it got out of its way. It does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. The character inherent in the American people has done all that has been accomplished. And it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes got in its way. For government is an expedient by which men would fain succeed in letting one another alone. And, as has been said, when it is most expedient, the governed are most let alone by it. Trade and commerce, if they were not made of India rubber, would never manage to bounce over the obstacles which legislators are continually putting in their way. And, if one were to judge these men wholly by the effects of their actions and not partly by their intentions, they would deserve to be classed and punished with those mischievous persons who put obstructions on the railroads. But To speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no-government men, I ask for not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step toward obtaining it.
It's an interesting argument. We'll begin where we end at level 1. Notice what he says. I want a better government. And how will we get a better government? By asking people what they think would be a better government. Because the representative form of democracy allows for a few individuals to be sent to state capitals or Washington, D.C., where those individuals get to decide for large numbers of people, millions and millions of people, what is the best way to do X, Y, Z. And Thoreau will say, sometimes those people lose sight of what government is all about. Notice on 389 as well. He says government, it, he uses the pronoun it, government does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate the character of the American people. Do that. So this is a very, you want to put this in your notes at level 1. This is a very patriotic argument that says the government has a role, but it is a very, let's use this word, limited role. A very limited role. Notice he will say, the governed are most happy when they are let alone by the government, right? Notice he says on 388 that his greatest concern is that the government is losing integrity. There it is, 3 lines up from the bottom on 388. It's clearly a word you want to write down in your annotations. What does it mean, integrity? Doing the right thing. And when government is no longer doing the right thing, it is the right of the people, he will argue, to stand up and to protest, to fight against the government. All right, let's do some annotative work very, very quickly. First of all, major message at 2A. What are your thoughts here? Is there one major message about the government that you want to write down? His view that government should be better. His view that government should have integrity. And most importantly, his view that the governed are the American people who should have a character. In other words, they should themselves be good people. They should themselves live good lives. And therefore, you wouldn't need as many laws. Okay? At 2B, let's just point out that Thoreau's prose is very dense. Do you know what I mean when I use the word dense? It's kind of complicated a little bit. Some students will say, you really got to slow down when you read his stuff. You can tell that Thoreau is a very educated man. He's a very bright individual. And his arguments, and that's really what he's making here, this is a rhetorical piece of persuasion, his arguments also, though, are very emotional, so we have to kind of make some sense of that. All right, what do we want to say at 3A about this? Well, what's your favorite text about fighting the government? Right? A few years ago, there was a famous movie called V for Vendetta, which played the game of fight your government. And there's lots of movies like that. What's your favorite protest film where somebody protests? What's your favorite film where kids fight against the power authorities, whether it be the school or it be their parents or whatever, right? Okay. What's your favorite video game where, for example, maybe that's the kids, all right? And then finally, 3B. What are your thoughts about involvement in the government? What are your feelings about protests? If the school, for example, let me give you a classic example of this. A few years ago, our school was going to put video cameras up. And my students and I were studying Thoreau, and one of my students said, I don't think that's a good idea to put video cameras up. They don't have any right to be videotaping us at school like that, and I think it's the wrong thing to do. I know one student said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a baseball bat, and I'm going to run down the halls with my bat. I'm going to sneak into the school. I'm going to bash all those cameras, and I'm going to break them. Right? But then another student said, well, what would Thoreau suggest? Because that's a violent response. And so for a single day, a number of our students came and sat in the commons area and refused to go to classes. They refused. They just sat there. And when they were asked by the administration after the bell rang, what are you guys all doing out here? They said, we are in silent protest against putting cameras in our building. We want you to know we do not feel comfortable with that at all. We don't think it's something that you even ask us whether it should happen or not. If it's such a big deal, why didn't you ask us as students whether we thought it was a good idea? You're violating our rights as students, and we're not going to class today. Their initial response by the administration was to say, you are going to class or we're going to throw all of you out of school. And the spokesperson said, you can expel all of us, but we're not leaving today. Tomorrow, maybe, but today, no. We're aware that you're probably going to put the cameras up anyway, but we want you to know we do not approve. The next thing we knew, guess who shows up? The media, right? The local newspaper reporter shows up to say, hey, tell us, why are you doing this? And one of the students said, we were working in Mr. McGee's class with Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. Great, then I get pulled in, right? Okay. My defense was, dude, they just read the article that says, if you don't believe something is right, then speak up. Don't just sit there and take it. And even if it still happens, at least you let your voice be heard. And that's called being an American. And that's called, for Thoreau, being free, right? And at the end of it all, the administration had to admit that, you know, that was probably kind of boring to sit there all day long in the commons area, and they didn't speak. They just sat there in silent protest. And of course, notice what happened. Lots of students who could have cared less about the video cameras came to lunch or walked through the commons and saw them. And then what are they doing? Oh, I think they're protesting the cameras they're about to put up. Dude, what's wrong with cameras going up? Notice what happened. Then all of a sudden there's a conversation, right, about that. Whereas before, it would have just happened, invisibly, we might say. Now, at least there was conversation about it. A few adults got involved. The school board had to entertain comments at the school board meeting about it. And it at least allowed for some conversation about where cameras could go, where they couldn't go. At the time, there was discussion that cameras would, for example, all go in the bathrooms because a lot of illegal activities happening in the bathrooms. The administration felt like we're going to videotape in the bathrooms, and if students want to do illegal activities in the bathroom, we're going to have it on camera, and then we can throw them out of school for it. Well, as you now know, of course, no video cameras in bathrooms, and you know this was part of that discussion as well. See? So there we go. Jot down at 3B for you. What are your thoughts about protest? When was the last time that you said to some adult or authority figure, yeah, no, I ain't doing it. And I'm not doing it because it's the wrong thing. You're asking me to do something that's wrong, and I don't want to do that. Well, there you go. A very important American idea. Fight the power of authority if you feel like it's the wrong thing. Thank you.